Check one, 2, 3. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. All right, my guest today has been a freelance sound recordist in New York City since 2008. Please welcome Michael Solomon.
Here I am.
There he is.
In all my glory.
All right, Michael, we always start the show off by asking, as a production sound mixer on set, tell us what's in your audio kit. So give us a rundown of your mixer, your recorder, all your mics, and everything you like to use on set.
Right. Well, my main recorder is a 633. I own 9 wireless, and that's 4 SMQVs, 1 SMV, 2 400s, and then all my receivers are 411As, 5 IFB, Lectro R1As, 2 MozeGear TIG lockets. Actually, some people would get angry at that. They would say it's a timecode sync box, not a locket. So I have 2 timecode sync boxes, a Deneke TS-C smart slate. My main mic for the boom is Sennheiser MKH-60. I also have a Schoeps CMC-6 with an MK41 capsule, which I really use more for indoor interviews. I find that it's a little more difficult on the pole. It's very microphonic. I own a 788, which I don't use any longer unless I really need to, but I still have it. For batteries, I'm all rechargeable. And for my distro, I guess I use a remote audio system, and my batteries are IDX NPs, NP-L7S. I think that covers it. My bag is an Orca. My boom, I have a couple Kteks, all internally coiled. I have a 102 CCR. That's kind of my first pole that I use for sit-down interviews. It's easier to travel with. And then if I actually have to use the boom, I take out my 152 CCR, which has a little more reach. I kind of like to stay as far back as possible. I'm usually fully extended on the pole. I don't know why. I find it to be more comfortable. Well, I guess I also own a plug-on, electro plug-on, and what's the hand mic I have? An RE50. And I think that covers everything I own. I don't use all of that every day, hardly, but I do have it all.
All right. Now, do you use the plug-on for wireless boom, or do you go wired?
You know, I tend to not go wireless with the boom. The reason for that is, you know, you're adding another stage of gain there. So let's say, you know, you have it set too low, you know, the person starts talking low. You can't get to that stage of gain during an interview. So now you've got to start cranking your gain at the recorder, and it's just not ideal. And then, you know, the worst scenario would be if it's too hot and it's blowing out. There's nothing you can do on the recorder end if you're blowing out at the transmitter. So I don't go wireless with the boom for interviews typically. I also don't really go wireless with the boom when I'm holding it either. It's really for handheld mic situations. I think I was doing a job that was a pretty regular job for Hudson's Bay Company, which is the company that owns Lord & Taylor and Saks Fifth Avenue. And we would show up, we would shoot an interview with kind of a pseudo-celebrity like Nick Jonas or Julianne Hough. I guess they're celebrities. We'd shoot a quick interview, and then we would go onto the floor, and they would come out, and we would have the wireless hand mic, and we would hand it to whatever CEO was giving a little piece to camera, because trying to boom in the environment, there was a DJ. It was just always too loud. So I bit the bullet and bought that mic and the plug-on for that job specifically, because in my experience, a lot of times, a lot of the jobs that have hand mics don't necessarily have sound people, which was my experience. But then I figured, all right, let me just buy this piece of gear. So I don't use that too much. Maybe if I'm shooting something and I want to go wireless from a board, get a feed. But it kind of sits in my closet.
Well, let's talk about some of the projects you've been working on. You had worked on a project in Alaska waiting for a woman to give birth. So tell us about that project.
Yeah. So that project was called Born in the Wild, and it was for Lifetime. It was 2014, and it's a show about people who give birth in these very remote places. And this was the first episode that was filmed, and we were filming in an area in Alaska. You go to Fairbanks, and then you take a 45-minute Cessna ride to this gravel runway that was built during the Cold War because it was very close to Russia, so pilots could land there and get some rest. But other than that, there's nothing there. There's a community of houses there, people that live there, and there's a post office. And they have their own power. Any food or anything, it all has to be flown in. There's no police. There's dirt roads. So it's very interesting being there. You're so remote. We had to carry bear mace with us, because if a bear comes up on you, you're supposed to spray it with mace and hope that it doesn't attack you. The job was a lot of fun. It was in July, so the sun never went down. It would be 3 in the morning and it would look like 6 p.m. Well, 6 p.m. in the summer. It was just always daytime, which, as long as you had an eye mask to go to sleep, you're fine. It was nice, and it was beautiful, and the weather was warm. The mosquitoes were out in force. There were a lot of mosquitoes. I have pictures. I'm wearing a mosquito net over my face, and I got gloves on the whole time. They were brutal. Yeah, and in the morning, our commute, we would get in a boat, and we'd take a half-hour ride across the lake, and there was a beautiful view of the mountains in the background. I think one of them was Mount McKinley. Just a beautiful view, beautiful job to work on. And then, so we go there, and we shoot our pre-interviews, waiting for her to give birth. And then she goes into labor, and we shoot the birth, and then we let her, rest, and a couple of days later, we shoot the post-interviews. It was just interesting because, she's basically in this tent in the middle of nowhere in the woods. So I had to try to figure out, what's the best way to get audio on this. You can't just throw a lav on her because she has this, like one of those exercise balls that she's kind of rolling on. So I figured, well, the lav's probably not going to be the best option. So I think what I did in the end is I took my Schoeps and I hung it from the ceiling of the tent with an XLR. And then I also had my boom. So between the boom and the Schoeps hanging, the audio came out really good. I think the husband who was helping was also mic'd, so that helped. And maybe the daughter had a mic on. But yeah, it's one of those situations where you don't really know how it's going to go down, and you can't really make any adjustments once things are happening. So you have to try to plan for, whatever scenario you may come across, while keeping in mind that this woman is giving birth to a child. So you have to be kind of respectful of that. We are filming a show, but she's also giving birth. So, it went very smooth. And I think they hired females after that for most of the crew members, just because of the sensitivity of the nature. But I did hear that on one of the shoots, the producer was saying to the person, "Can't you do it like Michael did it?" Which was nice to hear, but I still would have preferred to just be on the job. But so that was one of the more memorable, nice weather, interesting experience shoots, definitely.
How many people in the crew were there?
It was a fairly small crew. It was me, producers, I think maybe an AC. Maybe there were 6 or 7 of us total. Maybe slightly less. I'm not totally sure. But it wasn't more than 7.
Just all gathered around waiting for this baby.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. Yeah, we were on walkie, and they had a walkie, so if there was ever anything going on, they would walkie us to say, okay, we think it's happening. And then we had a satellite phone in case of an emergency. And it was just a lot of, shooting interviews, shooting their daily lives. They're pretty self-sustainable, living so remotely, because all the food that you bring in, it all has it's all really, I think it's like 1.5 times how much it should cost, because they have to fly it, so there's the price of fuel, and everything's just much more expensive. So it's better if you can, that you hunt for your food and you have a garden. So we would just follow them throughout their everyday routine, just waiting for this baby to come out. It was very interesting. I didn't know how it was all going to pan out, but I think it was an interesting episode. I didn't watch any of the other ones, but I think this one was probably the most interesting because there was more at stake. This was the location where if something went down, I think it was you'd have to call a helicopter to come get you. So if there was a problem with the baby, there's no immediate access to anything. You'd have to get a helicopter to fly you to a hospital.
That sounds very unique.
Yeah, it was.
All right. Well, Discovery Channel, they have Shark Week every year, and you tag sharks with Jimmy Buffett. So tell us about that.
I did. That was an interesting text to receive. I remember I came home and I was looking and I got a text message and it said, this is, so-and-so from whatever production company. We have a shoot coming up. We're going to be tagging sharks with Jimmy Buffett out in Montauk. Are you available? I was like, shit, I'm available for that. Definitely. So basically, it was for Shark Week 2019. We went out there and it was with this, I guess he's a marine biologist. We're out with him and he has these little kind of like jackets that he puts on little sharks. It's kind of like a little metal jacket with a camera on it. And then, catches a shark, puts this thing on it, and then lets the shark go. And then the jacket's held on with these metal pieces that erode from salt water. So after however long the piece of metal is set for, there's different kind of timers. The salt erodes the metal that holds it together, and the thing falls off, and there's floats attached to it, so it floats up to the top of the water, where there's an antenna that sticks out, kind of like a shark fin looking for a signal. He's just looking for a beeping on this antenna that he has, and then he has to go, try to find where the signal is coming from, and then he takes the vest and he picks it up out of the water and he puts the footage in the camera. So we did some of that with Jimmy. Obviously, there was some TV magic that went along with that because, letting the shark swim away and then trying to find it, that takes quite a long time. But, we were with him on the boat. He pulled up, there are these little sharks. He pulled one up and then he flipped it over. And Craig, who is the marine biologist, was, saying, oh, you can tell it's a male because of this or female because of this. And, it was an interesting shoot. It was a little more interesting, because it's Jimmy Buffett. If you say, oh, I went and tagged some sharks in Montauk, that's cool. But if you say I did it with Jimmy Buffett, it adds a little more interest. It's just such a weird... It's not a sentence that you would expect to say, when you talk about your work history. Tagging sharks with Jimmy Buffett. But yeah, that's on my resume as a video clip on my website.
Any special miking with the wind out there on the water?
No, I guess I didn't mention this. All my lavs, well, that's not true. Most of my lavs are Sanken COS 11s. I do have a couple B6s, but the majority of them are Sankens. And I don't think I boomed anything on that job because we're on the back of a boat. I guess that's the stern. And, they have all their fishing rods kind of propped up in the middle. Plus the boat's rocking back and forth. And it's summer and the sun's pretty harsh. So to try to fly a boom out there just wouldn't be safe and probably wouldn't be productive. It was just the two of them mic'd up and I was just sitting kind of in the cabin. They had air conditioning. I was sitting in the cabin of the boat in the AC. And that was it. It's funny, that same guy, the Dr. Craig, he hired me for something else in Montauk, doing more stuff with sharks maybe a month or two later, and they caught this big thresher shark. A thresher shark has this crazy tail. It actually swims up to schools of fish and it whacks them with its tail. And that's how it knocks the fish out. So it's this monstrous shark. So they were catching those so they could tag them. So the girl I have mic'd up, his assistant, her name's Caroline, they have a shark, it's at the back of the boat, and they're trying to wrangle it. And then when it's over, she comes up to me and hands me the mic and says, I'm sorry, I broke your mic. So I take the mic, and the lav, her shirt is completely soaked. So she was kind of holding onto this shark while it's in the water, and her lav was completely submerged in the salt water. And it still works to this day, So it had a windscreen on it. I know that helps for waterproofing, but... I have a Sanken that was by no means new. My mics they're very much at the end of their life, but it was submerged in the ocean and it still works and I had no issues with it. So hats off to Sanken for the durability of their mics. I think they're really wonderful.
Nice. Do you use any special expendables when you're micing up talent?
I have been doing the same method for ages. It's the Sanken, the COS 11 inside the RM 11, the rubber mount with a windscreen on it, a piece of top stick on the back, and that's it. If I use a B6, I do that moleskin sandwich with top stick on the other side. I mean, that's for the vast majority of miking, that is what I do. If I'm in a real, tight silk shirt on a shaved chest situation, or buzzed chest, I should say, I'll put a B6 kind of hiding behind the buttonhole. But really, the vast majority of the applications is a Sanken in an RM11, and then usually the transmitter is clipped onto the belt. I have obviously waist straps and thigh straps and ankle straps for when you need them. Actually, for the boat, I did have waist straps on everyone. Oh, okay, so I totally skipped out on a whole bunch of stuff. All of my transmitters I had wrapped in plastic. I have, obviously the non-lubricated condoms, but I find that they break easily. It's hard to change batteries. So I kind of created a bag out of saran wrap that I could access to change batteries. So all of the transmitters were wrapped in plastic. And since they were wrapped in plastic, that got rid of the clip on the back, since it was all kind of wrapped. So that meant that I needed a way to attach these transmitters. So I used waist straps on everyone. So they had a transmitter wrapped in plastic in a waist strap. And I also had on the boom, mine internally coiled. So at the bottom, I had above where the XLR connects, I think it was just like a plastic bag that I kind of taped to it and then had it come down the XLR a little bit where it's plugged in. Just, because that's one of the weak points, obviously, is the connection down there. But there weren't many situations where there was water being splashed overboard or anything. I think there were times when I would record with my kit in a Pelican case and then close the Pelican case and just kind of have my headphones on, just because, salt water is so much more corrosive than regular water. And if there is going to be a problem, it probably won't happen immediately, which makes it difficult to come back to a production company and say, hey, the salt water from a shoot 3 months ago messed up my gear. So it's better to take precautions than to have to try to get reimbursed for something that you can't prove. So there were some precautions that I took.
What's your favorite brand of waist strap?
Yeah, I think I just own Neopacks. I have mostly waist. I believe I have maybe one or two that are smaller for a thigh if someone's wearing a dress, a high dress. I have one that I kind of retrofitted. I was doing a job. Cyndi Lauper had a reality show, and I did her show, and she didn't like the way that a pack felt on her back. So I think I cut the pocket off of one of the Neopacks, and I think I cut a hole in it so that the clip of the SMV would stick out of it. So basically just the transmitter was in a pocket and I could clip that onto her. So yeah, I had that, which was my little invention to keep talent happy for that. But yeah, mostly waist straps. And again, I don't use them very much. I find that I don't need straps all that often.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Cyndi Lauper show.
So with Cyndi, it was interesting. I think it was day one, and I'm like sitting in her living room, and she's taking a voice lesson, and it was one of those experiences where you're like, I'm sitting in Cyndi Lauper's living room, listening to her voice lesson directly in my ears. This is a very unique experience that I wouldn't expect to be doing if you asked me, 20 years ago. That was like a 4 or 5 day a week job, 12-hour days. I think it was 2009. Maybe it was a little later than that, but I don't really do much reality anymore. I find that the 12-hour days are really just a lot. So, the money was good, but, it just I started getting a little burnt out. It's a lot, getting in and out of the van, humping all the gear. I think it can be difficult to enjoy being on a reality show, 5 days a week for 12 hours a day. I think the enjoyment wears out quickly regardless of what you're doing. Just because it is, it's a lot of work. And then, if you have a 12-hour day plus lunch, that's 12 and a half. Say it's an hour to and from set, that's 14 and a half hours. And then if you get 8 hours of sleep, that's 22 and a half. That gives you an hour and a half of free time for yourself. So I don't do a lot of reality anymore. I try not to do more than a 10-hour day if I can. But when I was younger, I loved it. I'm only 36, but, give me a sit-down interview any day of the week, I'll take it.
All right. Well, one of the big ones, I guess, you worked on the 50th anniversary documentary for Island Records in Jamaica.
Yeah, that was interesting. I was working at a production services company after college. It was 2005, I graduated college. I became the assistant equipment manager of a production company. I didn't know anything about gear, obviously. I just come out of college with a media studies degree, which I don't even know what that means. But I had a media studies degree. I became the assistant equipment manager. Then I became the equipment manager, and then I somehow became the in-house sound man. I was 24. I thought I knew everything. And then maybe I said a couple things on set too many times that pissed too many people off. And eventually, they said, all right, you're fired. So I said, all right, I'll go freelance. But fortunately for me, I was already booked as the sound man on this shoot in Jamaica. And, they already had the crew and the names and the carnet and everything was already kind of all set. So they told me that they were going to keep me on, as a sign of good faith or whatever. But I think probably more likely is that it would have been too much of a hassle to try to swap me out. So at any rate, it was my first freelance job. Maybe if it wasn't my first, it had to be within the first couple. And I went to Jamaica and we shot the 50-year anniversary of Island Records. And Island Records is the record company that's responsible for really bringing reggae to America, for bringing ska to America, kind of bringing Bob Marley to America. So we were staying at the resorts that are owned by Chris Blackwell, who is the man that started Island Records. The two resorts we stayed at, one was called Strawberry Hill. One was called GoldenEye, because it's where Ian Fleming wrote the GoldenEye books, the 007 books. Everything's paid for. You go to the bar, you get a beer, no per diem, none of that. It's just everything's free. You open up your villa door and you're on the beach. You have your own private beach. It was like being on vacation. And then on top of it, I grew up going to punk shows, and for some reason, punk and ska and reggae, punk music is very different than reggae, very different than ska, but for some reason, there's a lot of punks that also listen to reggae and ska. I don't know how it happened, but it is what it is. So we were interviewing some people, like Toots from Toots and the Maytals, this woman Ari Up, who was the singer of a band called the Slits. They were actually a punk band, but so we're in this amazing location in Jamaica, all expenses paid, and we're making money, and we're working with people who I've been listening to for years. It really, I think, to this day, that's the best job that I've ever done, and it was one of my first jobs. So I kind of topped out early, but who knows? Who knows what's in store?
Yeah. Do you remember much of the miking setup at the time?
Oh, yeah. That's one of those things where I look back and I go, oh, man, I didn't know what I was doing. I remember we were shooting with Chris Blackwell, who, as I said, is the owner of Island Records, and we're sitting outside in front of one of his houses or something on the resort at Strawberry Hill. I was using a tram. I don't think I own trams anymore. I think I owned one tram my whole life. I don't, the grill facing out, I find it's harder to hide. I just don't like them. But I was using a tram for whatever reason. It may have been the gear from the production company. Maybe I didn't own gear yet because I had just gone freelance. But anyway, we're outside, and I guess the mics didn't need to be hidden. He has a tram, with the alligator clip on his lapel. I'm starting to hear some wind noise, and I look, and I noticed that there's no windscreen on the mic, and it just didn't even occur to me, put a windscreen on the mic. I'd been out of college 3 years. I had been freelance for like 2 weeks. And I remember thinking, oh shit, I should put a windscreen on this microphone. The windscreen for a tram is a big gray piece of foam. So I was very concerned about continuity. So when there was a break in between questions, I said, hey, we should put a windscreen on this microphone, but it looks a little different, and the director didn't like that at all. So I think I got like a piece of felt, and I colored it black and made my own windscreen somehow so that it wouldn't be as obvious that a windscreen had gone on. And looking back, it's one of those things where, first of all, unless I was specifically told, I would assume the mic is hidden. You don't throw a mic on a lapel unless you're doing news. It's just something that I just haven't done in ages. And then also to be outside and not have a windscreen on the mic, it's just, that wouldn't happen either, you know? So it was just such an amateur thing. I'm fairly certain I had a Went X5 with me, and I was tethered to camera for everything. And it was really just interviews and maybe some B-roll. So, you know, for the interview setups, I'm sure it was a boom and a lav. Again, tethered to camera, so, you know, you split the tracks. And then for B-roll, if I had someone mic'd, then they were mic'd, or if not, I was just holding the boom and getting ambience. But, you know, things were different back then. Recorders weren't as prominent. If you had 4 people mic'd up, you really actually had to mix because you were recording in camera. You have a left and a right in camera. And, you know, if you have person A and person B on the same channel and person B burps while person A is talking, you can't get rid of that. You know, you're on the same track. Now, you know, everything's ISO. I get everyone mic'd up. I make sure levels are okay. I figure out the best, you know, way to send it to camera. I figure out how I want to listen to it in my ears, and I press record, and it kind of takes care of itself from there. You know, it's much easier nowadays. And, you know, I'm sure that people would look at the things I was talking about with using a Went X5 and say, well, in the 70s, we had to, you know, record onto tape. You know, we had DAT, and then the tape would get tangled or this or that. So, you know, things are always getting easier and maybe getting better. But I like that I can look back and see such a leap in how things have progressed. Even though I'm only 36, I've only been in the industry, I guess, if I, you know, joined this company in 2005, I've only really been in the industry for 15 years, and I can already look back and say, wow, I remember when we used to have to do this. And I think that's kind of interesting, you know? I like that.
That's cool. Now, out of all the projects you've worked on so far, what's been your favorite?
I mean, I want to say it's that Jamaica one, but I don't know if that would actually be my favorite because it was so long ago, it's hard to remember. I mean, I think there's different, you like different jobs for different reasons. You know, that Jamaica job, you know, we're in Jamaica and we are shooting all this interesting stuff and I'm getting paid, and it was one of my first jobs. But, you know, I think there was a bit of greenness to me, quite a bit. I wasn't as confident as I am today, that's for sure. I'm sure I wasn't able to appreciate that job as much as I would appreciate it today. I think I was much more cocky back then, which was extraordinarily undeserved. You know, I had no reason to be cocky. Didn't put a windscreen on a microphone, shooting an outdoor interview. So I don't know. I want to say that would be my favorite, but I don't know if it would be. You know, and then you have your other jobs that, you know, they pay your full rate, and they're once or twice a week, and they're like 2 hours long. So those are favorites for different reasons. Well, you know, it may be that Alaska. It's a toss-up between that Alaska job and that Jamaica job. Yeah, those were both just very unique jobs, very unique opportunities, and just beautiful weather. You know, you're out of the city, you're somewhere new. You know, I guess it would be either one of those, but I'm hoping that something comes along that'll be my next favorite.
Did you have any mentors along the way that helped you out?
You know, so I started this job at this production company, and I just kind of learned everything from the equipment manager that was there. So I learned about all the gear, and then I became the in-house sound man, just going on very easy ENG jobs, interviews, you know, real basic stuff. And then once I went freelance, you know, there was a guy that, I forget his name, and I forget how I met him, but he kind of, I wish I could remember his name. This is bad. He kind of took me under his wing for a little bit. I don't think he did audio anymore, but he taught me, he would show me different things with microphones. All of his gear was very old, but he kind of gave me some basics and gave me some pointers. But I really don't know that I have any mentors. And that's also interesting because now that I'm thinking about how I learned everything that I know, I don't know how I learned it all. I think you just kind of learn it as you go along. I remember the first time this guy hired me for a job, and he said, we're going to go wireless to camera. Do you know how to do that? And I was like, oh, shit. And I wasn't at the job. It was before. It was when I was being hired. And I had to look it up online. I'm sure I had to look up, there was a forum called Ramps. It was rec.art.movies.production.sound or .production.sound. And I think I read some tips there on how to set your transmitter and, you know, with tone, and depending on if you're using a line level cable or mic level cable, how to set that up to send to camera. And that was kind of like, all right, I hope this works. And I don't think there were any issues. And now, you know, wireless to camera or wireless, you know, to anything, it's like second nature. So I think I didn't have any mentors specifically, but just from being out in the field and, you gradually learn more, you gradually take on jobs that are a little more difficult. No, I think I just kind of learned by doing it. And I guess I do an okay job. I haven't had any emails from Post yet. It's been a couple of years, so that's good. But no mentors that I don't even know if I would have accepted a mentor. Like I said, I was very cocky. I always thought that I knew everything.
What is your all-time worst on-set experience?
I can't recall anything that really stands out as something that I'm going to walk off set or anything like that. I do know that fairly recently I was on a job and we're in a house and we're shooting two people and they're in the living room, they're in the kitchen cooking breakfast or something, and they're both mic'd. And the director, it was three of us. It was me, camera, and director. And he looks over, he's like, "Why aren't you booming?" And I was like, "Well, they're in the kitchen, they're both mic'd up, it's kind of a small apartment, we've got camera over there." He's like, "I need you to boom." I was like, "All right." So I go over there. Now I'm kind of in this corner booming these two people in a kitchen with cameras kind of right up against me because it's a small space, and I'm trying to boom these two people who are both mic'd for, we're not shooting a feature here. This is like a little docuseries. There's no reason why they can't be loved. So then we decide to walk them to the next location where we're picking up their kids or something. So so again, I think it was one person. He was walking his child. His child's in a stroller, or it was one of those strollers that's made out of plastic and it looks like a race car or something. So he's pushing this child down the street in Brooklyn, and he's, I think he's talking to camera maybe, but again, he's laved. So I'm kind of on the other side of the street walking parallel to them, because when you're walking, sometimes camera likes to run ahead and do a reverse. So I always find that it's sometimes easier to not be on the same side of the street and just, stay with them, but on the other side of the street. So you're out of their hair. And the director, I see him look over to me and raise both of his arms in the air, like I should be booming. So I run over and I go, what do you want me to boom? He goes, "I want to hear everything." And I'm like, he's wearing a mic. And he's like, "I want to hear the car." So now I'm walking, booming the sound of a plastic car with a child in it being pushed down the street. And I'm like, how much of this do we really need? How much are we going to add in post? We're going to bring the sound of plastic wheels on the pavement. We're going to bring that up in the mix. We can hear it on his mic. And then obviously now I'm trying to boom and I'm trying to walk backwards because camera was walking backwards at the time. So I'm booming a plastic car, walking backwards with camera and trying to keep an eye on making sure I'm not tripping over anything. For no reason. And it was just one of these directors where he just constantly wanted me to do something that didn't make sense. Look, I am a sound man, so, I'll be the first to admit I don't like working hard. That's not why I got into the business. But I do know when there are times that you need to be busting your ass. There are times when a lav doesn't sound right, when you're going to be dealing with people that are coming in that are not laved up. You need to have the boom ready. You need to be on your toes. This was not one of those situations by any means, and it was just more of the same the whole day. We were shooting later on that day in a diner, and we're shooting with a kid who's 11. For some reason, you put a mic on a kid who's young, it just never sounds right. So I got this mic on this kid. He's barely speaking over a whisper, and he's sitting at this table. His shoulders are all hunched, and he's so fidgety, and he's moving around, and it's just, I have to crank the mic so high to be able to hear what this kid is saying that any movement he makes is just so loud. And of course, there's mirrors everywhere, so we can't boom. So I turn to the director and I go, "Look, can we tell him to maybe not fidget so much, to sit up?" And he goes, "Absolutely not." And I go, "All right." And he goes, "Can't you boom it?" And I go, "Well, I can't because there's mirrors everywhere. I just can't." I even asked the camera, "Can I boom it?" She's like, "Absolutely not." So he goes, "Well, can't you put the boom under the table?" And I was like, "Look, it's just not really how it works. They're sitting in a diner on those kind of rubbery plastic booths, and it's like, oh, you want me to tape a mic to the table and hope that it points in the right direction with a kid who's fidgeting all over the place, rubbing on a seat made out of rubber and plastic." Just one of those jobs where I said, I'm fairly certain I will never hear from these people again. And then jobs like that, I wonder, should I just have boomed it You know, when he said, well, I want you to boom this thing when we're walking down the street, should I have just done it with a smile? I don't know. Maybe I should have. But, yeah, you know, the jobs where I feel like I'm being asked to do things that don't make any sense, those are the jobs that really, that I find difficult. You know, I don't mind if lunch is late. I don't mind if, you know, if I take a job and, you know, you don't have the budget that I want, so I take a little bit of a pay cut. All right, it's not ideal, but if you're working with professionals and everyone knows what they're doing and everyone's fun to be around, that's fine. That's great. You know, I recall this job paid well, and it wasn't a lot of work, but, you know, if we're shooting a 10-hour day, I don't want to be wearing the kit for 10 hours with my arms over my head when there's no reason for it. It's jobs like that that really get under my skin. You know, like the job I was on today, there'd be a noise and he'd say, you know, is that a problem? We're shooting interviews. And I go, no, that's fine. He goes, all right, I trust you. And it's like, good, thank you. Trust that I know what I'm doing. I understand that sound is kind of a little misunderstood. You know, have some faith that I know how to record things properly. You know, if this guy had a reason, he said, look, this, I want you to boom it because of this or because of that, but it made no sense. And I'm just not the type of person that will just work harder knowing that there's no reason for it. And maybe if I was that type of person, I'd make more per year and have more repeat clients. Who knows? But I don't know. It's just who I am, for better or for worse.
Now, if you could go back and start all over again, what kind of things would you do differently?
You know, I think when I started in the industry, I think I was very cocky. I think I really kind of acted like I knew everything, and I really didn't know a damn thing. I just think I really didn't have the right attitude. I think I definitely drank too much on nights that I had work the next day. Probably just didn't know how to keep my mouth shut and have good set etiquette. I think I would really just work on being the type of person back then who people would want to hire again. I think technically I was always very proficient. I never bought cheap gear. I always bought, you know, the first microphone I ever bought for the boom was the MKH-60. I bought that in 2008. I'm still using it. You know, the first boom I ever bought was a internally coiled Ktek. All my gear has always been Lectros. I think probably the first ones I bought were 401s. Now I'm all 411s, but I always had the mindset that if I wait until I can afford something better, it's going to last me in the long run. Maybe this G3 is cheaper, but it's going to break. It's not going to sound as good. It's not going to give me the range I want. Whereas my Lectros are rock solid. Maybe they're a little heavier. They take up a little more space. But I don't think I've ever had to get a receiver repaired. And maybe I've had to get a transmitter repaired 2 or 3 times in 13 years. So I think I'd really just focus on, you know, in those early days, being more of a team player, keeping my mouth shut, knowing my place, you know, not acting like I knew everything. I think that goes a long way. I think when you get to a certain point and you have you've got some serious credits under your belt and you have the years of experience, you can maybe speak with a little more authority, but even then it's tricky, you know? You're dealing with a lot of egos on set, and sound is usually not anywhere near the top of the totem pole, even though, you know, it is much more important than most people realize. I guess sometimes you just gotta roll with the punches. So I think I would tell myself to roll with the punches a little more back then. And I'm sure if you asked me this question 10 years from now, I'd say I would tell myself in 2020 to roll with the punches more.
If somebody wanted to get into production sound, what kind of advice would you give them?
Going back to what I had said, I think really good advice for anyone starting is to wait until you can afford quality gear. My first mixer I got was a Went X5, and then the first recorder I got was a 788. And I didn't get rid of that 788 until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I got a 633. If you buy gear that is inexpensive, you won't get the results you want. You won't get the range you want, especially if you're working somewhere like New York City where there's a lot of RF. It's not going to sound as good. Mics are going to be harder to hide. Things are going to break more often. I always tell anyone who's asking, wait until you can afford some serious gear because it will pay for itself. You won't have to send it in for repairs. You won't have to go renting gear because your stuff is broken or it's in for repair. It just really makes a world of difference to use professional gear. I guess another tip I would say, try to network as much as possible. I've never been a big networker. I don't like going to sound mixer meetups. I don't particularly love talking about microphones. Don't particularly love talking about work. But I could see how networking would maybe be a good way to get your name out there. You know, as a sound person, you don't typically work with a lot of other sound people. Occasionally, yeah, but you know, otherwise it's hard to get your name out there with other sound folks. I think one of the better tips that I think is more relevant nowadays is that there's a lot of online resources in terms of getting your name out there. You know, there's various websites where you can advertise and look up jobs. Also, there's Facebook groups. I haven't been on Facebook or Instagram or any of that stuff for a couple of years now, but when I was on it, I was always, you know, posting in the Facebook Sound Mixer group or reading the posts. Yeah, so I think, you know, having quality gear, getting your name out there, having a good online presence, maybe every now and then taking a job that is just a little over your head. Nothing that, you know, is way above your pay grade. But if you only take jobs that you know how to do, you're not going to ever learn. Another thing that I think is very important is building relationships with rental houses that are in your locale. I know that in New York, I built a relationship fairly quickly with Gotham Sound, and there's just so many benefits. I know I was on set. It was one of the slow months, so I said, okay, I'll work without my gear. And I was still using my 788 at that point, which meant, you know, 2 MP1s, 2 distros, one for the wireless, one for the 788, just drawing power, super heavy, and taking up a lot of space. And I was on set doing interviews, and I was using their 633. And I had never used one, and it was a bit of a turnoff to me because the interface is so different than a 788. But I was on set using the 633, and I said, "Oh man," I said, "This is really something that I really should have. There's no reason to be lugging the 788 around anymore." So from set, I called Gotham, and I got Joey on the phone, Joe Malika, and when I wrapped, I went home and I met. Gotham is in Astoria now, and I live in Astoria. Joe met me on my corner with an Orca bag and the 633 and whatever else I needed, and I just took it and I went home and that, you know, and now I had a 633. So, you know, building a relationship with a rental house, you know, there's so many pluses. You know, you can go to B&H and buy a recorder, but you're not going to get anything. You're not going to get, you know, they're not going to throw in a XLR if you need it, or they're not going to give you the same customer service and personal touch that a rental house will give you. I shouldn't say rental, a rental/audio, you know, retailer. You know, it's nice. You go in a place, you know everyone's name, they know who you are. You can ask for recommendations. You can try stuff out. You have people giving you tips. Like I know Peter was in the field for years. You know, he can give you real life tips. Oh, you know, this is better because of this. And then, you know, this might be trouble because of the frequencies are going to be, you know, bought up by T-Mobile or this and that. And it's just, there are so many things to gain by building a relationship with a rental house. And so many companies have unilateral pricing anyway. You know, you're not going to get anything from Sound Devices for cheaper at B&H because it's all unilateral pricing. But when you go to Gotham, maybe they'll say, okay, well, yeah, we can't charge you any less, but we can give you some cables, or we can give you this, or, you know, pay us half now and pay us half in a month or whatever. There's just, I can't stress enough, when you're in a pinch, having a relationship with a rental house is invaluable. They can really save your ass, and they can really help you out. And I think it's important to be loyal. You know, if there's multiple rental houses, like in New York, we have Pro Sound and we have Gotham. Those are the two main ones. You know, I think if you find one that you like over the other, if you stick with them and you really get to know them and you buy all your stuff from them, it really pays off. If you're a camera person, maybe it doesn't make as much of a difference. But with audio, I feel like, you know, going to one of the bigger retailers, it's just much more impersonal, and you're not going to get the same experience.
Well, as we kind of start to wrap things up, how can people get in touch with you online?
My website is productionsound.net. That's singular, productionsound.net. My email address is msolomony@gmail.com. Yeah, so I mean, that's, productionsound.net, and then you got my phone number and my email on there if you wanted to reach out for anything.
All right, cool. Well, this has been good. I want to say thanks to Michael Solomon for being on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'd like to say thanks to everyone for listening. If you have questions or would like us to discuss a particular topic, email us at locationsoundpodcast@gmail.com. Please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. We're available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.